The lawyer set the folder on the hospital table and said the words that would end one life and begin another. Marry someone by Friday, Mr. Ashford, or the company your grandfather built goes to the board on Monday. Nathaniel Ashford was 39 years old, dying by inches from a heart condition no surgeon would touch, and worth $4 billion he would probably never spend. He looked at the only person in the room who wasn't afraid of him, his night nurse, a tired woman in faded scrubs named Josephine Reyes. And he asked her the question that would change both their lives forever. Marry me, not for love, for 11 weeks. I'll pay off every debt you have and disappear from your life the moment it's over. She looked at him the way no one had looked at him in years, like he was a person, not a problem to be solved. And she said no. This is not a story about money buying love. This is a story about a woman who had nothing left to lose, and a man who had everything except a reason to keep living, and how, slowly, without either of them noticing, they gave each other both. If you believe that the right person can walk into your life at the exact moment you've stopped hoping for one, stay with me tonight. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let's begin. Nathaniel Ashford had not cried since he was 14 years old, the night his father drove a company car into a highway median doing 90 miles an hour and left a note instead of an explanation. He had not said, "I love you" to another human being since his mother passed 6 years later. Worn down by grief and a heart, the doctors said simply, "gave out." And he had not, in 11 years of running Ashford Dynamics, allowed a single employee to see him rattled, until the day his own heart started giving out too. It was a rare genetic condition, the kind of thing cardiologists wrote papers about instead of curing. Dilated cardiomyopathy, inherited, accelerating. His mother had died of the same defect at 41. His doctors gave him, if he was careful, 3 to 5 years. If he wasn't careful, and Nathaniel had never in his life been careful, considerably less. He told no one but his lawyer, a sharp, loyal man named Desmond Cole, who had served the Ashford family for 2 generations. Desmond was the one who eventually told him the second piece of bad news, the one that felt almost cruel in its timing. His grandfather's will, the will that had transferred controlling interest of Ashford Dynamics to Nathaniel 11 years ago, contained a clause nobody had ever expected to matter. If Nathaniel remained unmarried and childless past his 40th birthday, voting control of the company would transfer automatically to the board of directors, a group led by his cousin Preston, a man who had spent a decade trying to smile his way into Nathaniel's chair. Nathaniel's 40th birthday was 11 weeks away. "You're telling me," Nathaniel said from his hospital bed, staring at the ceiling instead of at Desmond, "that I am going to die owning nothing, married to no one, having built a company for a man who will burn it down out of spite." "I'm telling you there's a narrow window," Desmond said carefully. "A legal marriage. It doesn't have to be real. It has to be documented. 11 weeks buys us enough time to restructure the trust so Preston can never touch it again, with or without a wife in the picture after that." "And who exactly," Nathaniel said, "is supposed to marry a dying man for 11 weeks?" Neither of them had an answer. Not yet. Josephine Reyes had been a cardiac nurse for 9 years, and in that time she had learned to read dying men better than most doctors could. She knew the difference between a patient who was afraid of death and one who was simply tired. Tired of pretending, tired of performing, tired of being useful to everyone except himself. Nathaniel Ashford was the second kind. She clocked it on her first night shift with him, when he refused his pain medication not out of bravery, but because he said he didn't want to feel good about something that wasn't going to matter anyway. Josephine had her own war going on outside those hospital walls, one she never once mentioned to her patients. Her mother, Corazon, had raised her alone after Josephine's father left for a business trip when Josephine was 6 and never came home. Corazon had worked 2 jobs, cleaning offices at night and stocking shelves by day, until her body simply couldn't anymore. A stroke at 58 that left her half paralyzed and in need of a care facility. Josephine could barely afford on a nurse's salary. Every month was a negotiation between the care facility, the electric company, and Josephine's own stomach, which she'd learned to quiet with black coffee when the numbers didn't work out. She hadn't bought herself anything new in 2 years. She hadn't taken a vacation in 4. She sent every spare dollar to the facility and told her mother every single visit, that everything was fine. She wasn't looking for rescue. She had stopped believing in rescue a long time ago. She was looking, simply, for the numbers to work out for one more month and then the month after that. So when Nathaniel Ashford sat up in his hospital bed on a Tuesday night and asked her, with the flat exhaustion of a man who had already been told no by 3 people that week, to marry him for 11 weeks in exchange for enough money to clear every debt she had and set her mother up in the best facility in the state, Josephine set down his chart, looked at him for a long moment, and said, "No. You didn't even ask how much." "It doesn't matter how much," she said. "I'm not a line item in your estate planning, Mr. Ashford. Ask someone else." She walked out of the room, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Nathaniel Ashford lay awake not because of chest pain, but because a woman with nothing had just refused everything he had. He didn't ask again the next night, or the night after that. Desmond quietly interviewed 2 other candidates, a paralegal with student debt, a former assistant between jobs, and both times Nathaniel found himself inventing reasons to say no. Too eager, too rehearsed, too obviously for sale, in a way that made him feel, absurdly, like he was cheapening something he couldn't name. What he noticed instead, in the weeks that followed, was Josephine. He noticed she skipped the cafeteria dinner break every night, opting instead for a granola bar from her bag, and that when he asked why, she said simply, "saving up." He noticed she took a phone call every evening at exactly 7:15, always stepping into the stairwell, always coming back with her jaw a little tighter than before. He noticed that when a first-year resident snapped at a junior nurse over a medication error that wasn't even the junior nurse's fault, Josephine quietly took the blame instead, absorbing a reprimand that wasn't hers to carry so a 23-year-old girl wouldn't cry in the break room. He noticed, one evening, that she had left half her granola bar wrapped in a napkin on the nurse's station for a diabetic patient, 2 rooms down, whose family hadn't visited in a week and who Josephine had learned, through nothing but conversation, liked oats and honey. None of it was performed for him. That was what unsettled him most. She had no idea he was watching. She simply was that person in a hospital full of people clocking in and clocking out. It was Desmond who finally learned about Corazon Reyes. The stroke, the care facility 3 tiers below what she actually needed, the mounting debt Josephine had told absolutely no one about, not even her coworkers. Desmond brought the file to Nathaniel like a man laying down a winning hand. "I'm not going to use her mother against her," Nathaniel said, and surprised himself with how immediate the words came. "I'm not suggesting blackmail," Desmond said. "I'm suggesting honesty. Tell her the truth, all of it. The board, the clause, the 11 weeks. Let her say no with the whole picture instead of half of it." So Nathaniel asked a 3rd time. Not in a hospital bed, propped up and desperate, but standing on his own 2 feet in the hallway outside her shift's end, in the plainest words he had used with another person in over a decade. "I'm not asking you to love me," he said. "I'm asking you to let me help your mother. In exchange for a piece of paper that saves a company 4,000 people depend on for their own paychecks. 11 weeks, separate rooms, no expectations beyond showing up when it matters. And when it's over, you keep the money, I keep the company, and you never have to see me again." Josephine was quiet for a long moment. "Why me?" she finally asked. "You could buy 100 women who'd say yes tonight." "Because," Nathaniel said, and for once in his life, he didn't have a rehearsed answer, "you're the only person in this building who's never once looked at me like I was already dead." She said yes 3 days later, not for herself, but standing in her mother's care facility room, holding Corazon's good hand and doing the math one more time, the math that never worked until suddenly it did. The wedding was small, private, and legally exact. A courthouse ceremony Desmond had drawn up with the precision of a man protecting a client from every possible angle. Josephine wore a pale green dress she'd owned for 3 years. Nathaniel wore a suit that had been tailored for a healthier version of himself. Neither of them smiled for the photographs Desmond insisted on taking for the board. It didn't feel like a wedding. It felt like a transaction with witnesses. Corazon was moved to a private facility with round-the-clock care within the week. Josephine's debts vanished in a single wire transfer she stared at for 20 minutes before she believed it was real. and Josephine moved into a wing of Nathaniel's house so large, she got lost twice in the first 3 days, into a marriage that came with a contract, a deadline, and absolutely no instructions for what to do with each other in between. At first, they orbited like strangers assigned to the same address. Nathaniel worked from a home office that had become a second hospital room, hooked to monitors he refused to discuss. Josephine, unable to simply do nothing, began managing his medications without being asked, reorganizing his kitchen without being asked, learning without being asked that he only slept well with the window cracked and hated silence so much he fell asleep faster with the television on low, even though he never watched it. The first real conversation happened 3 weeks in, at 2 a.m., when his heart monitor's alarm woke her down the hall and she found him sitting on the floor of his office, unable to catch his breath, too proud to call for help. She didn't call an ambulance. She sat down on the floor next to him in her pajamas, took his pulse the way she'd done for strangers 1,000 times, and talked him through it in a voice so steady it embarrassed him how much he needed it. "You could have died just now and not told anyone," she said afterward, angry in the specific way people get angry when they're actually frightened. "Would it have mattered?" he asked, and he meant it as a genuine question, which was somehow worse. "Yes," Josephine said simply, and left the room before either of them could examine why she'd said it so fast. After that night, something in the house changed its shape. Nathaniel started eating dinner at the table instead of at his desk because Josephine made enough for 2 without asking if he'd join her, and it felt rude not to. Josephine started laughing at his dry, clipped sense of humor, the kind that had scared off 3 previous assistants, but that she found, against her better judgment, genuinely funny. He learned she hummed old boleros while she cooked, songs her mother used to sing. She learned he kept a single photograph of his mother in his desk drawer, face down, because looking at it took too much. He began driving out to visit Corazon with her on Sundays, not because the contract required it, but because Corazon had started asking for him by name, and refusing felt like a cruelty neither of them wanted to commit. Corazon, sharp-eyed even with half her body slower than the other, watched the two of them together for exactly 1 visit before turning to her daughter and saying, in Tagalog, low enough that Nathaniel couldn't understand but Josephine understood perfectly, "That man is not pretending anymore, Anak. Only you are." Josephine didn't sleep that night. The 11 weeks were supposed to be a countdown to an ending. Instead, week by week, they had quietly become something neither of them had a contract for: a life. Small rituals accumulated the way trust does. Coffee made the way the other liked it without being asked. A blanket left on the couch during a late work call, a hand that lingered a half-second too long passing a dish at dinner. Then, in week 7, Nathaniel collapsed at his own office. In front of the board, in front of Preston, the hospital corridor was the same one where this had all begun, and Josephine stood in it again, this time not as his nurse but as his wife, the word tasting stranger in her mouth than it ever had on paper. The doctors used words like accelerated and surgical candidate and risk, and for the first time since she'd met him, Nathaniel Ashford looked genuinely afraid. Not of dying, she realized, but of what dying would take from her this time, now that there was a her to take it from. "You should have let me go," he told her that night, voice raw. "You'd have kept the money either way. You didn't need to actually." He stopped. "Actually what?" she asked. "Care," he said, like the word cost him something to spend. Josephine sat on the edge of his hospital bed, the same bed, nearly, where he had first asked her to marry him as a business transaction, and she told him the truth she'd been avoiding for weeks. "I didn't marry you for the money, Nathaniel. I stayed married to you because somewhere around week 3, I stopped counting down the days and started dreading the day this would end. That terrifies me more than your heart condition does." Preston chose that exact week to make his move, filing a challenge to the marriage's legitimacy, hunting for any evidence it had been arranged rather than genuine, hoping to void the clause and seize control while Nathaniel was too weak to fight back from a hospital bed. He found the original contract Desmond had drawn, the 11-week language, the payment schedule, all of it, evidence enough, Preston believed, to unravel everything. He brought it before the board, and before Nathaniel, and before Josephine herself, expecting her to fold, expecting the paper trail to speak louder than anything that had happened in that house over the past 7 weeks. Josephine stood up in front of the entire board. In front of Preston, in front of the husband she was no longer sure she could call a business transaction even in her own head, and she didn't deny the contract. She didn't hide it. "Yes, there was an agreement," she said. "Yes, there was a payment. I'm not going to pretend otherwise to protect anyone's comfort, including my own. But contracts don't sit on hospital floors at 2 in the morning, making sure a man remembers to breathe. Contracts don't visit a stranger's mother every Sunday because they started to actually like her jokes. Whatever this started as, gentlemen, it isn't that anymore. And if you want to fight me on what my marriage is, you'll have to do better than a piece of paper I signed before I knew him." The room was silent. Preston had no answer for a truth that hadn't been written into any legal document. Nathaniel's surgery, when it finally came, was successful. A new experimental procedure his cardiologist had been hesitant to recommend until Josephine, using 9 years of expertise and considerably more courage than diplomacy, argued his case herself in front of the surgical board. He woke up in recovery to find her asleep in the chair beside his bed, still in yesterday's clothes. Her hand resting near his on the blanket without quite touching it, a boundary she'd apparently kept even unconscious. He nudged her fingers with his. She woke instantly, the way people who've spent years on night shifts always do. "You're supposed to be resting," she said, voice thick with sleep. "I've been resting for 11 weeks, he said. "I'm tired of pretending that's all this is." He didn't have a ring. He didn't have a speech prepared, not the polished kind he gave shareholders. What he had was a hospital gown, a healing heart, and a woman who had refused him twice before agreeing, and who he now understood had never once been in this for the money at all. "The contract ends in 4 days, he said. "I know what it says. I know you can walk away with everything you were promised and never see me again, and no one, including me, would blame you for it. But I don't want you to go. Not because of a clause, not because of the board, not because of anything written on paper. I want you to stay because somewhere in the last 11 weeks, you became the only reason I actually wanted to survive that surgery. I love you, Josephine. I should have said it before you nearly lost me. Marry me again, not the version on paper, the real one. No deadline this time." Josephine had spent 9 years watching people say goodbye in hospital rooms, and she had promised herself long ago never to let herself hope for anything a hospital room could take back. But she looked at this man, the one who had learned her mother's favorite songs, who drove out every Sunday without being asked twice, who had just fought a board of directors for her honor instead of his own, and the numbers, for the first time in her life, weren't the thing she was counting. "Ask me properly when you're not attached to a heart monitor," she said, laughing through tears, "and I'll say yes." 6 months later, in the same ballroom where the board had once tried to unmake their marriage, Nathaniel Ashford got down on one knee in front of no cameras, no lawyers, and no clause requiring it. Only Josephine, her mother in a wheelchair beside them with tears already falling, and a ring he had chosen entirely himself. She said yes before he even finished the question. Ashford Dynamics remained exactly where it belonged. Preston resigned from the board within the year, unable to out-argue a marriage the entire company had watched become real in front of them. Corazon Reyes moved permanently into the Ashford Estate's ground floor, where Nathaniel had a ramp installed before anyone asked him to, and where she still hums the same boleros every evening, now with an audience of 2 instead of 1. Nathaniel Ashford had once believed a wife could be arranged like any other contract, a line item to solve a legal problem before a deadline. What he learned, in the end, from the one woman who told him no twice before she ever told him yes, is that the people who save us rarely arrive with a ring or a proposal. Sometimes they arrive with a chart in their hands, a mother to protect, and a refusal to be bought. And it's only later, much later, that you realize the refusal was the first real gift anyone ever gave you. If this story reminded you that real love is never rushed, never bought, and never something you can put a deadline on, let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. Like this video, subscribe for more stories like this one, and I'll see you in the next story.